Welcome back to the Marvel Podcast for gifted listeners, and happy Black History Month. What better way to celebrate Black History Month than doing a deep dive into Marvel's first black superhero who headlined his own books, Luke Cage, aka Power Man, the Protector of Harlem. The man with unbreakable skin, who's bulletproof, and can throw a punch just as hard as any of the strongest heroes in Marvel. We're going to look into how he got his powers, what he did with his powers, and all you need to know about the Protector of Harlem. So, let's dive into the history of Luke Cage. Luke Cage, whose real name is Carl Earl Lucas, was raised in the streets of Harlem. Him and his best friend Willis Stryker would run around committing petty crimes throughout the streets of Harlem. Eventually, the two young men grew up a little bit, and they would join separate gangs. Luke would fall for a woman named Reva. But after an incident with a rival gang, Reva would not want to be with Luke because she wants to be with someone who can protect her. This eventually drives Reva into the arms of Stryker, who the two will date for a bit. Well, one night at a club, the Syndicate finds Stryker, who he's been moving in on their turf. Stryker was known for being great with a knife, but he didn't get a chance to pull his knife on this night, and the Syndicate goons start to beat him up in a back alley of the club when he tried to escape. Reva, realizing that the thugs are gonna strike her to death, she runs to try to get help. A few blocks away, Luke is playing some cards, and she calls for him to help Stryker. And even though the two were estranged, working for rival clubs, he got up and went to help his brother in a heartbeat. And because Luke was known more to work with his fist, he easily dispatched the goons and saved Stryker. But this incident did make Reva realize that Stryker was not the one for her, because of the life he lived. Luke at the time had given up being a gangster, so Reva dates Luke now. Because of this, Stryker believes that Luke has betrayed him, and that Reva was basically stolen from him. To get his revenge, Stryker plants heroin in Luke's office, and then he tips off the police that Luke was a drug dealer. Cops show up and arrest Luke and send him to prison. While he's in prison, he tries to get the Syndicate to take out Stryker from revenge. Unfortunately, during the hit, the Syndicate does kill Reva in the process. Angry at this, and just angry at the world, Luke would just be in fights constantly, and this would lead him to being sent to Seagate Prison. Seagate Prison was known as Little Alcatraz, and it was down in Georgia on the coast. When he gets there, he was immediately targeted by Billy Bob Rackham. Rackham was a racist guard who was power hungry, and he immediately didn't like Luke when he arrived. He was captain of the prison of the time, and he would have his lackey Quirt kind of do whatever he wanted to Luke. Well, when we are introduced to Luke, a new warden is showing up to the prison. And this is when Warden Stewart is about to start at Seagate Prison. Rackham tries to recruit Luke to be an informant for him so that he can impress the new warden. But Luke tells Rackham, "I ain't no snitch, I'm not going to work for you." So, Rackham, not happy about this, throws Luke into solitary and sends Quirt to break his spirit and just beat the crap out of him. Shortly after this happens, the new warden, Warden Stewart, shows up. And Rackham is like, what? You're early. The warden tells him, "Yeah, I'm early because I want to see how my prison is actually going to be run." Because he knows that if he showed up on time, Rackham would have been on his best behavior. After he demotes Rackham to just a normal guard, saying, "If you can survive a week as a normal guard, then you can have your captain position back." He then goes solitary, where Quirt is just beating the crap out of Luke in solitary, saying, "I'm going to make this man know who he's messing with and that he can't be just running this place like he owns it." Well, the warden sees this, and he fires Quirt on the spot. And since Quirt is no longer a guard, he gives Luke 10 minutes with him to tell him how he really feels. After this, Dr. Bernstein, who is a renowned scientist, goes to Luke and asks him, "You are the perfect specimen. I want you for an experiment that is going to help humankind." Luke brushes him off, being like, "No, I'm not going to be one of your little lab rats." Bernstein actually has some incentive for Luke. He's like, "I know you want parole, and I think this is the way that you can get it. If you volunteer for my experiment, I can put it in with the parole board and probably get you that parole that you so desperately want, especially since you say you were framed." And Luke does explain the whole story to Bernstein, and Bernstein agrees, "Yes, I think that you should be able to be free." So Luke agrees to the experiment, which the experiment is actually one of the parts of the Weapon Plus program. The Weapon Plus program is also known as the Weapon X program. And in this program, there have been 10 plus, quote unquote, weapons that have been created. Weapon 1 is Captain America, which was created in Project Rebirth. And then obviously there is Weapon X, which is Wolverine. Luke Cage would wind up be categorized as Weapon 6. And basically, Bernstein wants to create, his experiment is to make the perfect human. Can't get sick, won't be hurt. Well, won't be hurt, but like the optimized human. And do so, he gets equipment from Stark Industries. And the experiment is very similar. It's not very similar. It's kind of similar to what created Captain America. So, Luke goes into a bath of chemicals, and they'd be electrified with electro-biomedical systems. And the plan was to do little doses week after week to slowly improve Luke's cells so that he would be the optimum human and not be able to get sick from disease. Well, unfortunately, when the experiment is about to happen, Rackham takes over as a guard for the day. And he's all pissed off at Luke because Luke got him fired from his job. Or not fired, but demoted. So he pushes Bernstein out of the way, and he cranks up the dial to 11, which cranks up the electricity and just makes the chemicals go all haywire. And at this time, Luke starts to see visions of Stryker and Reva and Rackham, and then all of a sudden, the tank explodes. And Luke emerges. Rackham tries to assault Luke, and Luke kind of smacks him, not knowing what has just happened to him, and knocks him out. Well, after this, Luke winds up back in his cell. He's real pissed, and he just starts hammering away at the wall. And then he realizes, oh, my fists have made dents in the wall. And he punches a few more times and busts the wall down. He escapes from prison, and the guards chase after him and fire on him, because he picks up a rock, and they're like, oh, he's got a gun, so they fire on him. And he falls off a cliff. The guards think that Luke is dead, because who could survive shots like that? And Luke is like, oh my god, I just survived gunshots in this amazing fall. Whatever that doctor did to me, it did something. So Luke now is going to make his way back to New York because he wants to... Luke wants his revenge for what happened to him. But as he goes, he doesn't use his powers because he doesn't want to attract any attention to himself because he's afraid that he'll get sent right back to Seagate. So he gets to New York, and when he's in New York, someone robs a nearby diner, and Luke stops him. When Luke returns the money to the diner owner is very thankful and gives Luke a cash reward. And Luke realizes that he can use his new powers to make money. And so he decides to start Hero for Hire. Basically, hey, I got powers, hire me to help you with what you need. And because this is New York in Marvel, there is all the other heroes wandering around. So Luke goes, okay, I need to get a costume. He goes to a costume shop, and basically there is a chest from an escape artist who kind of gave up that life, and that's how he gets his Power Man costume. And inside there's chains from the escape artist, because he's an escape artist, and he wears it to remind him of the cage that he was in. And then he takes on the name Luke Cage. Luke for Lucas, which was his former last name, and Cage to also remind him of the cage he was in and that he was never going to go back to it. Also, fun fact, the actor Nicolas Cage is a huge fan of Luke Cage. Luke Cage is actually one of his favorite superheroes, and that's why his stage name is Nicolas Cage. Shortly after he starts Hero for Hire, he winds up stopping a mugging, and that's where he meets Claire Temple, who is a doctor. And even though he was shot, she wants to make sure he's okay, and she brings him to his clinic. She brings Luke to her clinic, and that's where he discovers that Dr. Burstein is actually alive and there and working with Claire. He's nervous if Burstein recognizes him, but Burstein doesn't say anything right away. So Diamondback is now in charge of the syndicate. He's done a lot in the years that Luke has been in prison. Luke, as Hero for Hire, has been busting up a lot of the syndicate's racketeering operations, and Diamondback wants to know who this Luke Cage is. And he knows that bullets don't affect him, so Diamondback has developed some special knives. One is a trick knife that it has a sonic emitter from it, so that when he throws it and sticks, it releases a sonic wave. One is a gas knife, where again, the tip is struck and it releases a gas that will hopefully put Luke out of commission. And an exploding knife that, again, tips hit, it explodes. So Luke finally goes and confronts Diamondback, and that's when Diamondback realizes, oh crap, it's Carl, it's Lucas. So the two fight. First he throws the sonic emitter knife at Luke. Luke smashes it, and he's disoriented, but he gets up and chases him to a roof. Luke now knows that he has trick knives, so while Diamondback is waiting to toss the gas knife at the door, once Luke comes out, Luke bursts through the side, and the knife doesn't hit because of the way he exited the stairwell to get to the roof. The two are fighting, and Diamondback drops his explosive knife. And then he falls back and falls through a skylight. As he falls through the skylight, the explosion knife also falls down with him, lands on the tip, and explodes, effectively killing Diamondback. When Luke gets back to the clinic, Burstein confronts him about knowing who he is. And Luke Cage basically says, "You're not sending me back." And so the Burstein basically says, "Listen, you have these powers. As long as you're not using it for crime or straight up evil, then I'm not going to turn you in." So now Luke needs an office, because he can't just keep using payphones. He needs an actual place for people to be able to call and hire him for Hero for Hire. He finds a small office that is above a movie theater that you actually have to go behind a movie poster to be able to even get to. That's where he meets DW, who becomes a good friend of his for a bit. And he takes the office. At one point, Dr. Doom actually hires Luke Cage for a job to stop some rogue Doombots. But Doom leaves New York before paying Luke. So Luke goes to the Fantastic Four and borrows their jet. He flies to Latveria and inadvertently starts a revolution against Doom. And he breaks into Doom's castle, and Doom is fighting him as and then he's like, "Why did you start this revolution?" And Luke is like, "I ain't starting any revolution. I'm just here for my money. I just want to be paid." Doom is shocked by this, But he's like, you know what? Alright. When one of the resistance leaders tries to kill Doom, Luke saves his life because he doesn't believe in killing. So Doom pays him and also earns his respect. And Luke goes back to New York now with his money. Sometime after Luke has been operating as his hero for hire, Rackham was actually fired from Seagate Prison, and he makes his way to New York. Shades and Kamachi, who were two inmates at Seagate with Luke, have escaped shortly after Rackham was fired, and they make their way to New York while hunting him down. While in New York, Rackham is approached by a Daily Bugle reporter who has information on Luke Cage, who was known as Carl Lucas, and wants to expose him for the ex-con he is. And he tells Rackham, alright, if we kidnap Luke Cage's girlfriend, then you can get to Luke Cage. So Rackham tries to kidnap Claire Temple, but he kidnaps Miss Jenks instead, who is someone who has been a client of Luke's a few times before. And she was at Luke's office at the time because there was a lawyer that was hunting him down. While they have Miss Jenks kidnapped, Rackham and Phil Fox, the Daily Bugle reporter, get into a fight, and Rackham actually accidentally shoots Fox. Claire, who is very confused about the whole situation, hearing that Miss Jenks had left Luke's office early in the morning, goes to the apartment and finds Fox dead and the gun. She picks up the gun right as police break in, and they arrest her for murder. So Rackham flees to his farm in Jersey because he's like, oh my god, I just killed this dude, and I'm going to get Luke exposed if it's the last thing I do. So Luke works with the lawyer that he actually saved Miss Jenks from to work on getting Claire freed. And Shades and Kamachi work with Luke to hunt down Rackham, as well as Luke's informant friend Flea. At the same time, unbeknownst to Luke, there is a wannabe vigilante hunting him down, known as Stiletto. Stiletto was the warden's son who had gotten fired when Luke escaped, and he wants his revenge. He hunts them to the farm and uses his stilettos to collapse the building that Rackham and everyone was in. Luke saves Shades, Kamachi, and Rackham escapes. Unfortunately, Miss Jenks died in the building collapse. And Rackham actually dies when he rushes onto the road and gets hit by an ambulance. When the police show up, they thank Luke, and Shades and Kamachi wind up going back to prison. But they do not rat out Luke because he saved their lives. After this incident, Luke continues to work as hero for hire, and a new group of heroes known as the Defenders has been formed, kind of. They have a rotating informal roster. It was just kind of like a thing that heroes became part of so that they can work as a team with other heroes. Luke did become a somewhat permanent member of the Defenders for a bit, because Nighthawk, who was the wealthiest member of the Defenders, paid a retainer fee just to keep Luke on for a bit. After Luke leaves the Defenders after working with them for a bit, his informant Flea dies, and as Flea is dying, he calls out the name Cottonmouth. Unlike in the Netflix series, he actually goes by the name Cottonmouth in the comics, versus in the series, he's very adamant that he is not Cottonmouth. So Luke actually winds up working for Cottonmouth because he believes that the heroin that framed him came from Cottonmouth. So if he works with him, he can find the records, and then he will be innocent. During the time working with him, Slick, who was Cottonmouth's second-hand man, winds up dying, and Luke is like, alright, where are the records, Cottonmouth? And Cottonmouth is like, you idiot. Slick was the records. His photographic memory were my records. So now without him, you can never be proven innocent. Well, Luke still has enough information to get Cottonmouth arrested. So he calls the police and has Cottonmouth arrested. A little later, during a fight with the Hulk, the Thing loses his powers. And because of this, the Fantastic Four legally need another member on their team, another superpowered being on their team. Ben is angry about this because, why are you hiring this dude, and why are you saying you're paying him and all this? Like, we always work for free. Well, it's eventually when Reed and Johnny step out to go try to find Ben, who's out at the bar. Luke is at the Baxter building showing off for their son Franklin Richards, just to keep him entertained, you know? And so during this, the Puppet Master actually gains control of Luke Cage, and Luke is enraged. And he's not going to hurt Franklin or Alicia Masters, but he does try to kill Sue, and he goes and destroys some of the Fantastic Four's equipment. And then he steals a Fantastic car and flies off to the prison where Puppet Master was. He breaks Puppet Master out. Meanwhile, back at the Baxter building, Reed reveals that he has a suit of armor that looks just like the Thing for Ben to wear. So, Ben and Reed use an old Fantastic car to fly to the prison, and they fight with Puppet Master, and he drops his doll that allows him to puppet Power Man, and they wind up sending Puppet Master back to prison, and Luke is no longer a part of the Fantastic Four because the Thing, quote-unquote, has his powers back. After his stint with the Fantastic Four, Luke finally meets his well-known partner and soon-to-be best friend, Danny Rand, aka Iron Fist. Bushmaster hired Luke Cage to kidnap Misty Knight, who was dating Danny at the time. And to incentivize him to do this, Bushmaster kidnaps both Dr. Bernstein and Claire Temple. He then forces Bernstein to do the same procedure on him that he did on Luke, thus giving him powers similar to Luke. Once Luke opens up to Iron Fist about what was happening, the two team up and they defeat Bushmaster. And thus they form the new Heroes for Hire. Shortly after, Danny is presumed dead, and Luke will ask Misty on a date. But when she doesn't show up for the date, he shows up to her apartment. At her apartment, he meets Cyclops, who is also looking for Jean Grey, because Misty and Jean were sharing an apartment at the time. While they're there, Luke gets knocked out by a mysterious gas. He is brought to the Island of No Return, where Dr. Seuss, who was experimenting on creating animal-human hybrids, has a fighting ring where he has these animal-humans duke it out. And he brings in different heroes who will fight against them so that he can test the prowess of his hybrids. Similar to, like, how Syndrome would bring heroes to his island in The Incredibles. Well, Luke goes into this fighting ring, and he fights all the human-animal hybrids, and he winds up beating them all, and gets to fight the professor. And he beats him, wins, and escapes the island. When Luke gets back to New York, he does meet Jessica Jones, another superpowered individual who has powers similar to him. The two have a small spark, but they don't really have any romantic interest at the time, and the two become friends. Iron Fist dies, quote-unquote, dies once again, and Luke is framed. Because of this, Luke leaves superheroes behind and moves to Chicago. But while he is in Chicago, Iron Fist is found alive and he is proven innocent. But he stays in Chicago for a little bit longer until he becomes homesick. When he gets homesick and returns to New York, but he has lost the thrill for, well, I won't say thrill, the heart for superheroics. So, instead he buys Gem Theater, the theater that his office was above, and he buys it with DW, who DW's uncle is the one who previously owned the theater. Iron Fist does try to get Luke to join the new Heroes for Hire business that he has started, but Luke originally refused just because his heart's not in the heroics anymore. The Master of the World, which is a villain from prehistoric times, he tries to get Luke to betray Iron Fist by getting him to work for Heroes for Hire. Intrigued by it, he tries to get Luke to betray Iron Fist, but Luke originally says no way. But then Master of the World destroys Gem Theater, so Luke kind of takes it and joins Heroes for Hire just to see what's really going on. In the end, he really can't betray his best friend, and the two work together to stop the Master of the World's plans. And Luke continues on working for Heroes for Hire. After this, Heroes for Hire was bought by the Stark Fujikawa Group, a conglomerate of Stark Industries and Fujikawa Industries. Well, when they were bought out, they fired Luke Cage and Scott Lang's Ant-Man because of their felony pasts. All the other heroes quit in protest because they're like, no, forget you guys, we're not doing this. So, after a stint with the Avengers for a little bit, Luke reestablishes Heroes for Hire with Danny, and he just wants to get back to the basics because he realized that he has forgotten the street level crime, the reason he started all this. And he's just going to leave saving the world to the other guys. After this, Luke Cage and Jessica Jones meet up, and they have a one-night stand where Jessica was drunk, Luke was feeling it. They had a one-night stand, and the aftermath was a little awkward. Jessica was upset because of Luke sleeping with her while she was drunk, but the two do wind up reconciling while they work as bodyguards for Matt Murdock. Shortly after this, Jessica realizes that night of passion led to a pregnancy. So her and Luke talk about it. They are going to keep the baby, and the two help each other. And Luke is emotional support for Jessica, who is having PTSD from her time being manipulated by the Purple Man. Now that Jessica and Luke are together, they move in together into an apartment in Harlem. Nick Fury would approach Luke Cage to help him in a secret war, finally enough, against Latveria. And it's so that they can take down Von Bardas. He gathers Spider-Man, Captain America, Daredevil, and Black Widow. While in Latveria, Fury wants to bring down Castle Doom, but this would wind up injuring multiple innocents, and the heroes just weren't really down for that. So Fury winds up erasing the memories of what happened during this incident. A year later, Bardas attacks Jessica Jones and Luke Cage in their shared apartment. He hits Luke with an energy beam and injures him internally. Well, when they bring him to the hospital, they cannot operate on him because of his steel indestructible skin. Nick Fury then tells Danny Rand to get Luke somewhere safe because the hospital is not safe because Bardas may attack it again. So Danny brings him to the Night Nurse Clinic, which is a superhero hospital where they work kind of in secret to make sure that superheroes are safe, or that they get treated without, their identities being revealed or anything. Because that could be bad if anybody knows who their identities are. Once Jessica Jones finds her boyfriend in the Night Nurse Clinic, Fury shows up and he apologizes to Luke Cage and Jessica Jones for dragging them into all of this. And he promises that he won't interfere with their lives again. Shortly after this, Luke Cage and Jessica Jones get married to consummate their relationship forever. After the marriage, Luke Cage was recruited by Captain America to the New Avengers. After there was a breakout at Riker's Supermax prison, which is where they hold supervillains, and Cage was able to stop them and prove himself as a worthy hero. When the superhero Civil War broke out, thanks to the Superhero Registration Act, Luke Cage has Jessica and their new daughter go to Canada so that they do not have to be subjected to the Registration Act. Luke joins Captain America's side during this, and he stays on his side until Captain America surrenders to the U.S. government. After the events of Civil War, when Captain America is killed, Luke Cage and Spider-Man gather up other unregistered heroes, and they form the New Avengers, who will directly oppose the Mighty Avengers, who are the government-sanctioned Avengers. And these will include Spider-Man, Spider-Woman, Wolverine, and Doctor Strange. And they will make their base in Doctor Strange's Sanctum Sanctorum. The new Avengers will help stop Raft escapees and expose the corruption of Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., similar to how Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D. in the MCU. But the Mighty Avengers, who are the registered government-approved Avengers, do not approve of these activities because of them. Do not approve of these activities because they are unregistered superheroes. Hawkeye joins the new Avengers, and Luke Cage is hesitant at first, but after Doctor Strange vouches for him, they allow Hawkeye to join the new Avengers. And Cage is a very effective leader for the new Avengers. Jessica Jones and Luke Cage eventually named their daughter Danielle after Daniel Rand, who is Luke's best friend. And they also make Danny the Godfather. And Jessica and Danielle become Luke's new motivation for his superheroics. When the Skrull invasion of Secret Invasion begins, it's revealed that Spider-Woman, who had been working with the new Avengers, was actually a Skrull. And after all the Skrull stuff happens, Luke becomes a little paranoid, and Jess, doing what she thinks is right to protect her daughter, registers with the Superhuman Registration Act and actually goes and stays at the Mighty Avengers headquarters. Luke is really upset about this, but he understands, kind of. Well, a Skrull ship crashes into the Savage Lands, so Luke Cage takes his team of the new Avengers to the Savage Land, and they go to investigate. But the Mighty Avengers show up, and the two teams start to duke it out. That is until Luke Cage rips open a Skrull ship and reveals the 70s versions of these heroes. They do have a device that was developed by Reed Richards that is able to expose the Skrulls so that they know who's who when they're fighting. Once Jessica realizes that Luke was right about the Skrulls, she does go to the Savage Land to help fight the Skrulls and stop them. While Luke and Jessica are fighting in the Savage Land, Danielle was at the Mighty Avengers compound where Jarvis was looking after her. But it's revealed that Jarvis was also a Skrull. And I do want to mention that in the comics, Jarvis was an actual person, not just an AI. So during this time, there's the Dark Avengers, who were some villains that were taking place of the Avengers. One of them being Norman Osborn, who was the Iron Patriot. So Luke Cage goes to Osborn to help him find Danielle, agreeing to do anything that Norman Osborn would need. The two were able to find and rescue Danielle. After this, Luke Cage was attacked by the Hood, who are actually one of Daredevil's main kind of bad guy groups. And they used a power dampener on the heroes. This power dampener caused Luke to go into cardiac arrest. And they weren't able to operate on him because his powers came back too quickly. So they go to Norman Osborn, who happens to also have a power dampener. And they use it again on Luke so that they can perform surgery. Unfortunately, a group that was not so friendly infiltrates the operation and plants a bomb on Luke Cage's chest. Well, when the surgery is done, his skin's hard again, and they're like, crap, he's got a bomb on his chest, or in his chest. So with the help of Wasp and Henry Pym, the two of them shrink down, and Doctor Strange helps them remove the bomb from Luke Cage's chest and save him. After this, in the Dark Reign, Steve Rogers helps defeat Norman Osborn, and Steve Rogers becomes the new leader of the government-run Avengers. He offers Luke Cage a position, but Cage says no thank you because he doesn't want to be part of another government-run Avengers. Instead, he buys the old Avengers mansion from Tony Stark for $1, which he had to borrow from Danny, And in the old Avengers mansion, he runs his own Avengers, who aren't under the government's control. And two of the members include Jessica Jones and Danny Rand. Even though he doesn't want to run a government Avengers team, he does accept the position of running the Thunderbolts. That is a job that was given to him by Steve Rogers, because Steve knows Luke's past of being an ex-convict turned hero. So he thinks that Luke is the perfect person to lead the Thunderbolts, which are a team of villains who are being, not rehabilitated, but he's allowing them to be able to be heroes. And Luke Cage is the perfect man to help with that. When Wilson Fisk becomes mayor of New York City, he attempts to enact an anti-vigilante act, which is for his own personal vendetta against Daredevil. After Luke Cage and a group of heroes try to kill Wilson Fisk, this prompts him to allow Otto Octavius to use anti-crime drones in the city. But what this does not count for is the Purple Man, who taking power from his kids, is able to augment his powers and control supervillains to kill all of the heroes. But his own child, Joe, does help Luke Cage take him down and stop the Purple Man's reign. Because of this incident, Wilson Fisk flees New York City, and Luke Cage steps up to become the mayor of New York. Also, Luke and Jessica would go on to adopt Joe to make them his adoptive parents. And that kind of brings us to present day in the comics. So Luke Cage, the man who went from being framed to being part of an experiment, to leading multiple Avengers teams, and becoming mayor of New York. So now let's go over the top 5 things that we learned in today's episode about Power Man. Number 1. He was framed for heroin possession by his ex-best friend, and then, while in prison, was targeted by 2 very racist guards. It was the 70s. Number 2. When a new warden started at the prison, Dr. Bernstein was brought into the prison and selected Luke to be a test subject for a project similar to Project Rebirth, which is what gave Captain America his abilities. Number 3. When he got back to New York, he established Hero for Hire, which was a solo act. Eventually, he befriends Danny Rand and starts Heroes for Hire, where the two work together in the same vein that he worked for when he did his solo act. Number 4. Even though Luke had a few different partners throughout the comics, he eventually meets and marries the love of his life, Jessica Jones, and the two have a daughter together named Danielle after Luke Cage's best friend, and they adopt another son that they raise together. And number 5, Luke Cage would be the leader and member of various teams, including the Fantastic Four, the Defenders, multiple different variations of the Avengers, the Thunderbolts, and eventually the Mayor of New York City. Next episode, we're going to look into how people responded to characters like Black Panther and Luke Cage when they came onto the scene. By kind of looking back at different sources that I'm going to look into, dig up, just see how fans reacted. Just because we're in this climate now of people can voice their opinions on the internet and say they don't like anything new when it comes out. So let's go back to the 70s and see how people reacted to these new black characters. The Marvel Podcast for Gifted Listeners is now on Apple Podcast and Amazon Music. This episode was written, recorded, and edited by myself, James Bazinski. Intro music, outro music, and the timeline sound was sourced from freesound.org. You can find us on Instagram at TMPFGL, YouTube at the Marvel Podcast for Gifted Listeners, and if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions, you can email them to tmpfgl@gmail.com. Please like, subscribe, and rate the show wherever you listen. Until next time, gifted listeners, thank you for listening, and Excelsior!